Hello everyone, Waddling Duck here to teach everything there is to know about naval combat, how ships work, the best ways to control them, and how each ship matches up against every other ship. First, I'll go over how the different ships work. In general, there are two mechanics at play that some ships have and others don't. First, some ships are able to attack while moving, while other ships have to stop while shooting. Second, some ships fire broadsides, and they have separate cooldowns for the port and starboard cannons. I'll go through the ships one by one to make a list of which ships have which mechanic. First up is the Delhi fishing boat. While not really a combat vessel, the Delhi do have arrows on their fishing boats. This fishing boat can attack while moving with a 360-degree radius for firing with no broadside attack. Next is the galley. It cannot attack while moving and does not have broadsides. The Dhow can attack while moving with a 360-degree radius for firing with no broadside attack. You can think of the Dhow as the Mangudai of the sea. It is very fast and great at kiting, but is weak in head-to-head fights. The junk cannot attack while moving and does not have broadsides. The Ladya attack ship can attack while moving with a 360-degree radius for firing and does not have broadsides. As you can see, none of the Feudal Age ships have broadside attacks, and only the Dhow and the Ladya can attack while moving. Moving on to Castle Age ships, the Hulk can attack while moving and does have broadside cannons. The Bagla is a bit unique. It has broadside cannons which do fire while moving, but it also has arrows which do not attack while moving. The War Junk can attack while moving and does have broadside cannons. In the Imperial Age, all three of the Carrack, the Zebek, and the Baochuan are able to attack while moving with broadside cannons. For any ship with broadside cannons, you can roughly double your damage by constantly microing the ships in a circle. This allows both sides to fire, as there are long cooldowns for each respective side. The only exception to this is the Bagla. Since you lose the arrows if you're going for both broadsides, it will only be a small DPS gain and is probably not worth the hassle for most players. The Galleass I included in its own category. Although available in the Castle Age, it does not fare well against Castle or Imperial Age ships. As the French have the Hulk available in the Feudal Age, that ship will remain the core of their navy through both the Feudal and Castle Ages. Adjusted for cost, the Galleass has less health, damage, move speed, and armor than the Hulk, and also doesn't have double broadsides. The one thing that it does have going for it is that with a forward-mounted gun instead of broadsides, it can actually continue attacking while chasing a fleeing target. Now, for each of the possible matchups. With the exception of matchups that include the Lodya attack ship, I did not research any techs, generic or unique, and only did base units with as close to equal resources as possible. Most of the technologies that affect ships have little impact on Castle Imperial Age ships. While they can be significant for Feudal Age aero ships, it's a significant resource investment that quickly becomes obsolete. However, the no technology comparison doesn't work in Lodya matchups, as nearly the entirety of the Lodya's strength comes from upgrades. Due to this, for the Lodya matchups, I had both sides research every upgrade for the applicable age, but did not include Civ unique technologies for civs other than the Rus. For each of the Feudal, Castle, and Imperial Ages, there are 6 possible matchups. The ships of each age are so dominant over the prior ages that I didn't bother testing each combination, as that would result in 66 different matchups instead of 18, which is already a lot to deal with. So here's just 2 of the other matchups, so you don't have to take my word for it. With junks against hulks, the junks having proper micro with the hulks having poor micro and no broadside usage, it still has the hulks easily winning without losing a single ship. And here we have war junks against carracks. This castle versus imperial matchup is much closer than feudal versus castle matchups, but it will still be a win for the imperial ships every time. Now, in the feudal age, we begin with the galley versus the dhow. The galley absolutely dominated the dhow in this matchup, not losing a single ship. In all of these tests, I attempted to keep the ships focusing on a single opponent, however shift queuing attacks in naval combat seemed a bit buggy and didn't always work right. So there are a few moments throughout this video where attacks are spread out before I manually adjusted. Next is the galley versus the junk. This one was a little closer, but a galley with near full health still survived. Next is the galley versus the ladya. This is the closest one yet, with a single galley scraping by. Next is the dhow versus the junk. The junks win with more than half of their ships remaining. Next is the dhow versus the ladya. The ladyas survive with a little less than half of their starting force. And finally, we have the junk versus the Lodya. Again, the Lodyas survive with little less than half of their starting force. As we've seen, for Feudal Age matchups, the galley wins all 3, the Lodya wins 2, the junk wins 1, and the Dhow loses every matchup. However, the galley only had a slight edge over the Lodya in that matchup. In the Castle Age, we begin with the Hulk versus the Boglaw. The Boglaw wins with a little over a quarter of its starting force. Next is the Hulk versus the Warjunk. The Hulk wins, however it survived with only 1 hit left, and it managed to get the first hit off. This makes it a perfect tie. Next is the Hulk versus the Lodya. The Hulk barely won, with less than 10% of its health remaining. Next is the Boglaw versus the Warjunk. The Boglaw survived with less than 1 hit worth of health, but the Boglaws also had worse pathing and lost some damage at the start of the fight, so I put this one as a tie. Next is the Boglaw versus the Lodya. Even with some pathing issues at the start of the engagement, the Lodyas survived with half of their health. And finally, we have the Warjunk versus the Lodya. The Warjunk didn't even make it halfway through the Lodyas. As we've seen, Castle Age matchups are generally fairly balanced, with several tied fights. The Lodya won 2 fights, the Boglaw and the Hulk each won 1 and tied 1, while the Warjunk tied 2. It is also worth noting that in the Lodya v Hulk matchup, the tech for the extra 2 armor on the Hulk is critical, and the Hulk would pretty easily lose the fight if it did not have that tech. In the Imperial Age, we begin with the Carrack versus the Xebec. The Xebec wins with a little over a quarter of their forces. Next is the Carrack versus the Bao-Xuan. The Bao-Xuans didn't take a single loss. Next is the Carrack versus the Lodya. The Carrack didn't even make it through a quarter of one of the 4 Lodyas. Next is the Xebec versus the Bao-Xuan. This one was pretty close, but the Bao-Xuan came out ahead with about 1/3 health remaining on a single ship out of 4. Next is the Xebec versus the Lodya. The Xebec didn't even take out a quarter of one of the 4 Lodyas. Finally, we have the Bao-Xuan versus the Lodya. Yet again, the Bao-Xuan got about a quarter of a way through one of the 5 Lodyas. You may have noticed that the Imperial Age is similar to the Feudal, where there is a strict hierarchy among the ships. The Lodya wins all 3 matchups. The Bao-Xuan beats everything except the Lodya, while the Xebec only beats the Carrack, and the Carrack loses at everything. A quick disclaimer here is that the Lodya attack ships require very specific management, and the upgrade technologies are very buggy. In most matches, many Lodya ships can never reach their full potential. In these tests, I only use Lodyas that were properly and fully upgraded. I will release another video specifically covering how to manage Lodyas in order to keep them at their best and have them dominate the seas. There's even a technology outside of the dock that has hidden bonuses for the Lodya. Also, the Lodya is generally population inefficient compared to the other Imperial Age ships, so it isn't always a guarantee that you have the option to properly outnumber your opponent. I did not account for the extra cost of additional docks or houses needed by the Rus. One other factor is that I did not utilize the double broadsides in these tests. For any matchup except for the Boglaw and the Lodya, this was irrelevant as both sides would have been able to utilize it for the same overall effect. However, this did cause the Boglaw and the Lodya to perform better in these tests than they would against double broadsides. In the Castle Age matchups, if you account for double broadsides, the Hulk comes in first, the Lodya second, the Warjunk third, and the Boglaw last. Although the Lodya takes a big hit when broadsides are added in, their wins in the Castle Age over the Boglaw and the Warjunk were so significant that even doubling the opponent's DPS would not have changed the outcome. The same goes for all Imperial Age matchups. The Lodya was just so dominant that doubling the damage of the other units doesn't even matter. You may have noticed that I didn't cover Demolition Ships in these matchups. Demolition Ships will deal heavy damage to any ships they can come in contact with, but they have to be snuck into combat to not be destroyed first. This makes it impractical to attempt any sort of head-on-head matchup involving them. Just be aware that demolition ships explode twice. Once on either a successful impact or manual detonation, and a second time when it is destroyed through any means. Also, the damage is reduced based on distance with a relatively short radius. And finally, most archer ships have a bonus damage against demolition ships, giving a possible reason to still make a few archer ships in the later ages. All things considered, a tier list for naval combat will go roughly like this. In the S tier, we have France. They get automatic map control and suppression in the Feudal Age with their early Hulk, and they remain competitive throughout the Castle Age as well. Although they are stuck with the Carrack and Imperial, this is offset by having one of the strongest unique upgrades for 10% more damage. But the control gained in the Feudal Age just simply can't be understated. In the A tier, we have the Rus, the Holy Roman Empire, and the English. The Rus are simply a strong choice in every age if properly optimized, although their power spikes are significantly delayed going into each new age as they require numerous technologies. Something worth noting is that their ship costs are heavily weighted towards wood, for which the Rus coincidentally have strong bonuses for. The Holy Roman Empire has a mediocre unique upgrade to double the repair rate of docks, but their ability to put relics in docks for up to 25% increased attack speed gives them the potential to be terrifying in the Castle Age. However, this is quite conditional, and if you do not have access to relics, I would bump them down to B tier. The English have a very strong unique technology to reduce the cost of all ships by 10%, along with a passive to increase their range by 1. Range bonuses were not relevant in the head-to-head tests that I ran, but in large armadas, it can be very significant to have an extra layer of ships getting shots off from the back. In the B tier, I have the Chinese and the Mongols. They both struggle in the feudal and castle ages, but the Bao Xuan is excellent in Imperial. The Chinese have a passive that lets docks work 20% faster. However, the unique upgrade in the docks will only affect the Tier 2 ship. While that has potential for a strong push immediately upon hitting Age 3, it is very short-lived as you will be transitioning into Age 3 ships at that point anyways. The Mongols are all around weaker than the Chinese Navy, although it is hard to really analyze their unique upgrade. With it, the Mongols receive wood and gold every time they sink an enemy ship, so they can bolster their lackluster roster with additional numbers. In the D tier, I have the Abbasid and Delhi. They have the weakest ships by far in both the feudal and castle ages, with the second worst in the Imperial Age. They do generally have faster ships, which can allow for hit-and-run tactics to stifle a fishing economy, but you'll still be working harder to achieve subpar results compared to stronger ships in general. The Abbasid have unique tech to increase the health of their Age 2 ships, which combined with half-cost docks can help very slightly ease the pain in Age 2, but once you get to Age 3, both the passive and the unique tech are irrelevant, and they are simply stuck with worse ships than anyone else. The Delhi Sultanate has a unique tech to double the repair rate of fishing ships, and they also have the passive to add the archer to fishing ships. This means that literally everything special about them revolves around fishing ships. The double repair rate likely does have potential, but again, you're just spending more resources and taking more effort to simply try to catch up with what the other civs can do with ease. I hope you enjoyed this content, and I do expect everyone to still be in shock at the results of the Lothian attack ships. Be sure to keep an eye out for my follow-up video for an in-depth look at the Lothian mechanics. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.